day and welcome to Quilts of Valour National Sew Day. So glad that you're joining us. Too bad we're not in person, but hey, we're here together and that's wonderful. My name is Nancy Arbogast. I'm the regional representative in Ottawa, Ontario. And I'm here today to show you a quilt pattern for a really easy quilt that is very good for using up leftover strips. So the quilt behind me is called a coin quilt with pizzazz. And it takes a lot of the fundamentals of coin quilts, but just adds a little bit of twist to it. You can use leftover pieces of binding. You can use leftover strips from your other projects. You can use jelly roll. And I've made my own jelly roll using the leftover strips from other quilts that I've been working on. To make this quilt, to make the whole thing, and this measures 55 by 70, exactly the size that we want for a Quilt of Valour, you're going to need 28 2.5-inch strips and 66 inches of background fabric. Now for the quilt behind me, I used a black with a little bit of a silver fleck in it, and 66 inches was enough to do it. I am very tight with my fabrics, and I'll show you a couple of places where you can get the most out of your fabric. If you're a little bit more generous with your cuts, you're going to need more than that 66 inches. But it's a nice, easy quilt to work with. There are very few corners to match. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to collect your fabrics. You want to curate your collection. If it's too wild, then there's going to be too many discordant patterns going on. And even the black background fabric is not going to be enough to pull it together. The second quilt that I'm doing in this style, I've drawn a collection of blues in a wide range of very light fabrics to some very, very dark fabrics that are almost the black. And then I've chosen a dark navy fabric with a green fleck in it. So those are going to be the two fabrics that I'm working on. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to select 4 strips of your 2.5-inch strips, and you're going to stitch them together into one long strip set. So you've got 4 strips of fabric times width of fabric, and I've just stitched the whole length and pressed the seam to the dark side. You don't have to match these seams with anything, so it doesn't matter which way you press them, as long as you press them nice and flat. So now you've got something that is 8.5 inches wide times width of fabric. Gives you an idea. So then, and we're going to go on to the second step, which is subcutting this. Take that to your cutting table and line it up very carefully. And the ends are not going to line up, so you've got to straighten out that edge first. You want to make sure that everything's nice, straight, and lined up. And I'm lining up my ruler on the seam line, and that's going to give me the straightest edge possible. I'm going to cut off my selvages. Okay, my ruler moved, my cutter didn't cut. Let's try that again. There we go. Okay. Now you want to cut your units into 5.5-inch strips. And I've taken one of those orange stickies and put it on the bottom of my ruler. So I just have to slide that in so that it's nice and tight. Make sure it's straight by lining up one of the lines on the seam line. And cut. And there I've got 2. 4. 6. If I open up this last stretch, I can get 7. And then I've got a nice piece of extra to start my next scrap. Okay. And that's your next step, just making those unit A's. Once you've got a stack of your unit A's, you're going to want to stitch your sidebars onto it. So I'm going to chain piece approximately 5 of these units. And this is one of those places where if you're really good with your chain piecing, you can get 5 unit A's for every strip. And these are cut as 2-inch strips, not 2.5. This is a 2-inch strip. So I'm going to put it up very close to the selvage, and then I'm going to start stitching. I stopped stitching just before I've got to the edge of that unit, and I'm going to grab my next unit and slide it onto the background strip very close to the previous one. There's maybe 1/8 of an inch gap there. You want to make it, give yourself enough space that you can cut that into part of the block, but not so much space that you're going to run out of space on your strip. So that's one of the places to really watch your spacing. And of course, you want to make sure that that background strip is staying nice and straight at the 1/4 inch. The 1/4 inch seam will make a real difference in the shape of your blocks. I've got to the end of my first strip. So I've got my 2-inch background strip. I've managed to get 5 unit A's stitched onto it. And I've just got a little bit more than the selvage. But you can see how small the gap is between each of those units. So what I need to do now is cut in between all of those so that I've got a combination unit A with a sidebar on one side. So let's go to the cutting table and get that done. When I'm stitching the sidebars on, I leave the pressing until the very end. I can still work with the units. There's lots of room to work, and you can do it more efficiently with the pressing at the very end. So now all I'm doing is cutting these units apart. So I'm going to cut off I'm lining up the edge of my ruler with the edge of my block, making sure it's straight across the seam, cutting that off. And when I get to the middle, it's 2 very close cuts. There. There. You can see all I separated is that very teeny tiny piece. I've seen other people do similar blocks, and what they do is they just take the scissors and cut through there. That leaves you a block that's not quite squared off, and you have to do some fudging when you start stitching them together. I find doing this subcutting with the blade and the ruler much more accurate and gives you a much cleaner block. So there you have them cut with the first bar. So once you've got your part A with the sidebar down one side, you need the sidebar on the second side. So I'm going to take my stack of strips, and again, I'm going to position it so that I can chain piece a whole pile of them down the other side. So let's go over to the sewing machine and get started on that. Sewn the background strip onto the second side. And again, I've got to the end with just a little bit left over, my selvage, a little bit of wastage, but very little, because I've kept the spacing in between the units very tight. So that very little bit of space is going to let me clean this up. So I'm going to trim these apart, and then I'm going to head to the ironing board, and I'll see you there. I never knew I'd choose a hobby that requires ironing. Iron was never my favorite device around the home. And there you have a stack of finished blocks. Once you're finished pressing, you've got a stack of finished blocks. They've got edging or background edging on two sides, and they're open on the other. And you're going to put those together so that one is vertically arranged and one is horizontally arranged. And just keep alternating them. So if we look at the quilt behind me, we can see that this block, the bars are horizontal. The adjacent block, the bars are vertical, horizontal and vertical. And you're going to want to mix up the colors so that you've got a good balance of darks and lights and mediums, and you don't have any obvious clumps. This quilt is arranged with 6 blocks across each row and 8 rows. Now that 6 times 8 will be a little bit smaller than the quilt you want. It will also give you some strange openings. So on the quilt, where you've got the horizontal bars, your background border gives you a nice closed edge. Where you've got your vertical bars, your edge is open and looks a little incomplete. So that's where adding the border comes in. So I cut the border at 4 inches, which gives me a good 3.5-inch border. And that completes the frame around the whole quilt. So again, it's 6 blocks across each row, 8 rows in total. Good mix of colors, and so you're mixing the designs and mixing your patterns. And I know that some of you are working with the Northcott fabric bundles. This would work really, really well with those fabric bundles. And you could use the same 4 colors and use that one dark one as your border. You're going to find with that you don't have quite enough for the background border, but you do have enough for the bars. But you've got a number of varieties to use. And this would work great with all those leftover strips from binding, leftover strips from fabrics, and it will make a nice, easy quilt. So this is the coin quilt with pizzazz. I found it a nice, easy project. I found that it whipped together very quickly and created a very dynamic pattern. I hope that you find it as easy to stitch as I did, and I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope you're enjoying our National Sew Day as you go virtual for this 2021. Thanks very much.